Welcome to another military interview by the Sons of History. I'm Dustin Bass. In this video, I will be interviewing Arthur Leach, the World War II Navy fighter pilot who fought in the Pacific Theater and was stationed on the USS Yorktown. Now, these interviews are not so much to talk about the wars themselves, but to give the perspective, the soldier's perspective, of what they saw and what they did. So without further ado, I present to you the war story of Arthur Leach. How are you feeling, Art? You feeling all right?
Art's doing okay.
Fantastic. Hey, before we get started, you were telling me a second ago about your first car. I want to get everything in perspective. What was your first car?
My first car was a 1924 Model T Ford, and I bought it when I was a junior in high school for the total sum of $18.
How much was gas in those days?
16 cents a gallon. The tank, you sat on the tank, the driver, and it held 5 gallons. And it would go 45 miles an hour.
Hey, and 45 miles per hour is pretty much as fast as anybody needs to go. That's
fast enough in that rumbler.
All right. Now, Art, you enlisted in the Navy in February of 1942. And you enlisted while you were in college. How did that work out?
I was in my senior year in February 42. I would graduate in June, but I received a notice to take my draft physical, and I hitchhiked home about 40 or 50 miles to take it. And afterward, I went up to the draft board and I said, "You're going to let me graduate, aren't you?" And they said, "Did you pass your physical?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And they said, "You'll be gone in 2 weeks." And I said, "I didn't realize I was that important to the war effort." And I went out the door, which was a big wooden door. You can visualize what it looked like with glass in the middle. And I slammed that doggone thing as hard as I could. And of course, all the glass fell down the floor, and I just kept walking. I went across the street to the courthouse and asked a couple of the officials if they would write me a letter of recommendation. I was going to try and enlist in the Navy to become a pilot. And I stopped at a couple banks the same way and asked the president to do the same. And I was walking another block or two to my father's office. He was an insurance and real estate man. And I told him what I was going to do. I was going to hitchhike back to college and over to Peoria, which was about 70 miles. And I was going to try and enlist to become a pilot. That I did, and I took a preliminary physical and sort of a written exam, and they were satisfied with that, and they gave me a ticket to go to St. Louis and take the rest of the physical and that. So I went back to Bloomington and got on what was called an interurban, like a streetcar, went all the way down to St. Louis, and there were probably 500 to 1,000 guys there to take physicals for different things. Two of us passed to become pilots that day out of the bunch. Guys would be colorblind or couldn't hear enough, and I could hear back then, you know. And I could look at girls too, but I didn't. Right now, I can still look at them, but I don't remember why.
I'm sure somebody's there to remind you.
Yeah, well, the two of us, of course, we had been dilated, our eyes, and we couldn't go anyplace. We made it across the street to a tavern, though, and we stayed there for a couple of beers, I think, back then. And I don't drink beer now.
Yeah, well, hey, I'm taking up the slack for you.
Oh, you getting enough, are you?
Yeah, I'm taking up your slack.
I think that being 101 years old, I think it's attributable to good bourbon.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Leanne agreed with me.
So, Art, why did you want to be a pilot?
Why did I want to be a pilot? Most of the guys that had graduated from my fraternity in 1939, 40, and 41, you couldn't get a job, so the majority of them enlisted in the military. And probably 9 out of 10 of them became pilots or navigators or bombardiers. And I guess that's what I wanted to do because they had done it. And a number of them were Navy or Marine, and of course the rest of them were Army Air Corps. Then it wasn't called the Air Force. There wasn't an Air Force as such back then. It worked out that way. I made a deal with the Navy to let me graduate, and they said, "When do you graduate?" I said, "June 8th. Well, on June 10th, I was getting a haircut and getting in uniform. Wow. You know, that's the first thing they do is give you a haircut. I had the pleasure of being in the second pre-flight school. The Navy began pre-flight schools just before I got in there, and I reported to the second class, which was at this time I was going to Iowa City to the University of Iowa, where they were conducting this for about 3 months. And then I got sent to St. Louis to Lambert Field, and that was preliminary flying. We were in the open cockpit Stearmans and N3Ns, biplanes, 225 horsepower, and they'd cruise around 100 miles an hour. We flew those for about 35 hours, I think it was, and then we got sent to St. Louis, and we got into not the biplane, but the SNJ, which was a 650 horsepower, and it had retractable landing gear and electric flaps and that, and it would cruise about 150 to 60. And we were in those for probably 50 to 60 hours for 3 or 4 months. And then we got sent to Pensacola, and we flew the same type aircraft in formation and then instrument flying and so on. And that was about 6 months. So it took about 11 to 12 months to complete the flying. And I got my wings and my commission in May of 1943. And I got married that same evening. And the next day I was on my way to Jacksonville, and then I got moved right away to Miami, and we went to advanced fighter training down there. The airplane we flew was an obsolete combat aircraft called the F2A Brewster Buffalo. It was 1,100 horsepower, and it had a long landing gear. It sort of bounced when you came into land, and we flew those for about 3 or 4 months, and we did field carrier landings, practice for simulated aircraft carrier landings. And I got sent to Glenview, Illinois, which is north of Chicago, a little ways. And we were going to fly from there out to Lake Michigan and do our carrier landing practice and qualification on converted cargo ships. They had 2 of them, the Wolverine and the Sable. And I don't recall which one I landed on, but I was the first guy of the group that was out there, probably 6 or 8 of us. And we were flying the SNJ at the time aboard, and you had to do 6 satisfactory landings. Well, I was the first one to complete the 6, and the guy jumped up on the wing and gave me a little piece of paper. He said, "This is your heading back to Glenview. Go up and wait for the rest of them to qualify." And so I was the guy that led them back. And then I got my orders for San Diego to a fighter squadron. And when I got to San Diego, he said, "Oh, your group isn't here. They're up in Seattle." So I had to get back on a train and get on up to Seattle. And we flew out of Seattle for about 2 weeks, and then they moved us to Whidbey Island, which is north in Puget Sound, and I was fortunate enough to find an apartment in a little town on the island. The island was mostly a resort area, and towns were very small. I don't remember the size of it, but it's still in existence, and so is the airport. And a United Airline captain friend of mine, his son is flying out of the same airport that I did, only he's doing a depth charge airplane called the Poseidon, twin engine, and he just got back from Japan. He had been on temporary duty over there. And his father has a good time talking about what he's doing and what I did, and that he's doing at the same place. He gets a kick out of that.
That's pretty amazing. A bit of a small world there. Now, after Seattle, you wound up in Hawaii. What was it like when you wound up in Hawaii?
In Hawaii, we went out on the Essex from Oakland, California. It was transportation. There was no action at all. The Essex applied a zigzag course all the way out, and I don't recall the number of destroyers that they had for screen, but it was transporting a bunch of Army people and a bunch of equipment. There was no activity at all on there, and they only served one meal a day to you because there were so many extra people. And of course, that would be the same size, the Essex class. That was the first one, number 9 in that class, and the Yorktown was second, number 10. And there was probably about 30 of them before they changed to a bigger ship. The Yorktown and all of the Essex class had 875 feet of runway at the flight deck, and had about 3,500 personnel on board, plus the air group, which would be about 300 more. We had 36 airplanes, fighters, to begin with, and they ended up, we had 45 and then 54 and then 72 aircraft, and that's quite a few. Bombers had about 18, and the torpedoes had about 18, and we would escort them. We were probably 20 miles an hour faster than them, so we wove back and forth to use up the extra speed. And of course, we were layered above them to protect them in case an enemy came about. And when they did, why, then we were supposed to shoot them down.
So when did you enter into combat?
We came into Pearl Harbor, of course, in Hawaii, and then they moved us after they unloaded our airplanes and that onto the Hickam Field which would be right at Honolulu. And we were going to be based in Maui, which was 2 islands down south. I have no idea just how far south anymore, but we ended up moving from there to the big island, Hilo, down the very south one and the biggest one. And we spent time there, and then we ended up on Kauai, which would be the northernmost for a little while, and then we moved back to Oahu to wait for the Yorktown to be ready to go to war. And of course, we practiced all the way out to the Southwest Pacific. Our first action was in the Philippines after the Battle of Midway. And we did a lot of bombing and that in various islands of the Philippines, Manila and Luzon, primarily the biggest island, and then Mindoro and Mindanao, which would be next, and Leyte and Samar, I think was the name of the other one. And then we moved on up to what is now Taiwan. It was, what was it?
I think it was Formosa.
Formosa it was called, yeah. Yeah. I don't know who picks all the names. Yeah, and then we moved on. We went over in the China Sea and ended up in French Indochina, now called Vietnam. And we engaged in Saigon, and I think they call it Camaran Bay now, and the Mekong River. We shot up the gunboats and that. And of course, you get down low to do that.
What was that? What was that like? Getting down low and shooting the gunboats?
Well, we could do 400 miles an hour, and of course, we're a little harder to hit when we're doing 300 or 400. We'd pick up a little ground fire, get bullet holes in the wings or the fuselage, and as long as it doesn't hit something life-threatening, why, it doesn't matter particularly. It'll fly with a hole about half the size of your bookcase behind there.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with this vision.
No, that's right. So now, what planes did you fly in, or did you just fly in one particular plane?
The Hellcat was an F6F made by Grumman. Cost the Navy about $30,000 then. It had 2,250 horsepower, and as I say, it would do a little over 400 and carried 400 gallons of fuel. That would be 250 gallons internal in the wings and the fuselage, and then a 150-gallon belly tank. It was droppable, but you never dropped it out in the fleet because you'd end up without them pretty soon, and you needed the 150 gallons. We'd be in the air 4.5 to 5.5 hours in a fighter. And of course, there's no place to go to the bathroom or that, and nobody serving lunch.
Well,
You had a pilot relief tube under the seat, which was a funnel with a rubber hose to the bottom of the fuselage. And I wouldn't advise using it.
yeah, I wouldn't either.
See?
Well, the plane captain, the doctor did, of course. He had either wrapped the hose around some things before it got to the clip under the seat, and you couldn't get it up to where you needed it for the action. And if you did, why then, of course, he had fixed the hose so it was too short to empty. And the only place to empty it was to get it up to the canopy and open the canopy about 2 inches, and the air would suck it out. But when you found out it wouldn't reach that far, and of course it had filled up because he had put gum on the outlet. And I mean, he had anticipated, and of course he had cleaned it all up. You just dumped it in the floor, of course. Couldn't sit there and hold it forever.
So,
It's easier to hold it before you used it.
Guess they never heard it depends, did they?
thought about that. Yeah, get the dependent I would-
He was, of course, laughing the whole time that you were gone.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He
Until
was laughing when he had to clean it up.
exactly. Now I'm
It was a good airplane. Yeah. But,
I'm sure it would have been very difficult to be holding it and trying to land on a carrier. What was it like to land on a carrier out at sea?
well, the carrier's moving, of course, and it gets going about 30 to 35 miles an hour. And with the wind over the deck, why, you're landing at about 90 to 100, and you come over the deck and circle. You adjust on the downwind leg to get your position and your height and relation to the ship. And then you start your turn to come up the back, but you don't want a long, straight way because your engine is big and you cannot see the deck when you're going straight up behind it, trying to play catch up. And you want to be in your turn as you come over the back end, and you angle back flat and cut. You should be right over the back end of the deck when you cut and settle in. You want to get the first, second, or third wire. There were 8 wires back then to catch a prop airplane. With the jets, there's 3 wires, only 3, and they're coming in at 125.
That's incredible.
And they don't have that big nose, of course. They can see where the pilot is sitting, and everything slopes down, and they drag it up the back, and they're playing catch up. And I have never done it. I've just watched it. But
So which carrier were you on?
we we're on the Yorktown, which is now a museum in Charleston, South Carolina Harbor. As I'd say, it was about 100 feet off the water, the flight deck, about 90 feet wide and 875 feet long. You didn't get all of that to land on, about half, because they'd parked the aircraft that had landed before you on the front end, and of course readied them for the next flight. And the barriers would go up to catch you if you didn't get a wire and keep you from running over the ones that were up there. If you came in too fast, you'd be floating over the barrier and land on the guys that had landed before you. That occurs occasionally, and of course kills everybody that hits. Flight deck is a dangerous place. And of course you take off at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning and you can't see the end and you got to get off.
How do you know? I mean, how did you know that you were close to the end to where you take off? How did you gauge that?
The launch officer is standing probably 455 feet from the end of the deck, the front end, and he's going to rev you up to full power, and you're holding the brakes, and it doesn't take you long to get going pretty fast. And a lot of guys don't make it, and of course you never see them again. The ship runs right over them, you know, when they flop in the water. Yeah. And if you're going a little bit slow while you sink, and of course you don't want to splash.
Yeah.
The airplane would sink in 15 seconds. And of course, it's going to sink even faster with the ship doing 30 miles or more. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, you hear it scrape all the way down the. We had several that didn't make it. We had one guy come to us and he was on a pre-dawn launch the next day. I thought that was wrong, that they shouldn't have put him on a pre-dawn, and we never saw him again. He didn't complete his first hop. Pretty wasteful. Yeah.
That is sad.
Yeah. The ship would always launch you about 200 miles from where you were going, the target area, and they stay in a comfortable zone. And you work your navigation in the ready room before you go out on the deck and man your aircraft. The airplanes are brought up from the hangar deck and spotted, and the officer of the day gets the spot for where they are. And of course, if the captain is leading the group, why his plane and his group are the first ones to take off. They catapult the first few to get enough deck to launch the rest of them. They probably launched 10 or 12 of them from the catapult. The catapult is 120 feet, and you do 120 at the end of it, and it throws you off. It's quite a jolt. You put your head back against the headrest. If you don't, you'll have a broken neck. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lesson you only learn once.
And when you come into land, you want to be sure that your shoulder harness is tight. Otherwise, your teeth are going to be on the gun sight.
Yeah. Well, speaking of gun sights, the Hellcat was made to defeat the Japanese Zero, and apparently it did very well. How did you do against the Zeros?
The Jap Zero was slightly faster, but of course, when he's getting shot at by you behind him, he's taking evasive action, which uses up some of his speed. So we could make up the difference when he'd make a sharp turn. Well, he's a bigger target also, and we could cut inside and play catch up.
Now you shot down, or you were given credit for 3.5 planes. Is that right?
3.5, yeah. One of our other pilots and I were both shooting at the same airplane, and so we each took half.
Well, tell me what was that like to be going after an enemy plane and shooting one down? What was that like? How difficult was that?
That's what you were sent out there for. I never looked at it that I was shooting at an individual. I was shooting at a piece of equipment. It just so happened there was somebody in there. And of course, I felt differently when a tracer bullet went flying by me when he was on my butt. But
Yeah.
you don't think of them as people. Guys that do go crazy almost. It's difficult. There's a Marine came back from over in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he says, I'm still killing. I said, don't look at it that way. I said, look at it that you were shooting at a gun that was shooting at you, and you were supposed to eliminate the gun. Quit thinking about people. And I don't know if he ever did, but
Yeah, it's
you
got
could drive yourself nuts doing that. Yeah.
Now, there was a moment, and I've heard you during several interviews, that you thought you had gotten hit, but it wasn't blood that was pouring down your back. What was it?
So
I didn't hear that story.
we were flying up to Tokyo at that time, and this tracer bullets were flying by. A guy was on my rear end, and I didn't know it, of course, and he was getting closer, but fortunately his aim was even with us, but he was off to the side and it was going by. And I felt something run down my back, and I reached back there. I thought, gee, I've been hit and it doesn't hurt. Well, when I came back, it was all just a cold sweat. And I felt good that I was able to sweat.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And not bleed. Right.
Yeah, not blood.
So how long did you serve in the Navy? How long were you in the Navy?
I was 4 years, uh, counting the training and the time overseas. And then when I got out of service, I went back in the Ready Reserve, and I flew every month out of Glenview for 10 years. And so I got to fly jets for quite a while.
And what was your rank when you left the Navy?
I was same as a captain, and Navy called it a senior lieutenant. And when I finished at Glenview, I had been notified that I was going to be promoted to lieutenant commander, which would be the same as a major in the Marine or Army. But I didn't bother to accept it because I was going to quit. And secondly, I wasn't going to get a pension anyway. So rank would mean nothing particularly.
Yeah. So you,
I had 2 stripes up here,
there you go.
same as a captain. I don't remember how much money we made. I think about 7 or 8,000 a year at that time, and of course we got flight pay, which would be a little extra, and I've forgotten what that amounted to. It was according to your rank. The more rank you had, the more pay you got, the more flight pay you got. I always thought that was wrong. I thought a major or a captain or a lieutenant, they all ought to get the same flight pay for doing the same duty, particularly. And I think that's the way it is now. You know, a general would not have near the opportunity to get shot down because he's going to be behind the lines. And here he is getting enormous flight pay.
Yeah.
Just ask backwards, if you pardon my French.
There's a lot of things that are asked backwards in this world. So. Now, you were awarded 2 air medals and the Distinguished Flying Cross.
I have a DFC and 2 air medals, right? I have no recollection of what the citation said. In the early 50s, after we built a home, it burned, and my officer jacket and my citations and all that burned up with it, and my armament and my uniforms and everything. And so I haven't refreshed my memory on any of that.
Well,
What'd you say, Lee?
I said, so we forgot about some of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
well, that stinks that you lost everything in the fire. That's terrible.
Yeah, everything. The house burned to the ground, right?
Boy.
And fortunately, it was February then. We had not been to my wife's parents down in Bloomington since Christmas. So we had gone away for the weekend. We had one suitcase for the 3 kids and mom and I. And there wasn't anything. My dad called us on the phone and he says, "Don't hurry home. There's nothing to come home to." And when we got there, we knew what it was. It was nothing, right? Foundation. The furnace did not shut off, malfunction, and it melted the joints on the copper tubing, bringing the gas into the house. We lived out in the country, so we had a 1,000-gallon tank in the backyard and copper tubing leading to the furnace. And of course, when the copper tubing melted, everything filled up and it was kaboom and just blew. Yeah.
That's incredible. So, Art, I hope that you enjoyed our conversation. I know I
enjoyed you. Yeah. I hope we can do this when you're 101.
Well, if you're still around, we'll do it.
Well, you'll have to ask the guy upstairs.
He owes me a favor.
Ask him what he did with me.
I will.
Thank you, Dustin.
Thank you. It's been fun.
I've had a good time. We hope that you enjoyed this military interview, and we thank you for watching. Now, before you leave this video, if you can like and leave a comment on this video, and if you haven't yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel, it would be greatly appreciated. Now, if you're wanting to know all that we're doing at the Sons of History, just visit our website, thesonsofhistory.com. Again, thank you for watching.